I was an exorcist in training. What we encountered was no ordinary demon. There is no official record of the exorcism we performed at 1237 Palmer Avenue in Los Angeles last November. The church encourages us not to speak to the press about such things anyway, as our work tends to be sensationalized. In truth, most cases we investigate aren't possessions at all, just ordinary, tragic mental health issues wearing the trappings of religion. I was still only a year into my apprenticeship back then. Up to that point, even in the few instances when I'd witnessed a genuine possession, the process of exorcism was far more mundane than the movies would have you believe. My mentor, Father Anthony, would simply follow the protocols as outlined by the Holy See, sprinkling with holy water, laying of hands, and exfoliation, along with the recitation of the prescribed prayers. Only once had I seen the basic prayers fail. It was a case where the entity within an elderly woman had been allowed to fester possibly as long as 5 years. The family had spent half a decade ignoring the problem, ascribing it to ordinary dementia, even as her behavior grew worse and worse. We had been called in after she'd twisted the head off a beloved family cat, all while invoking the names of minor demons she had no business knowing. Even then, Father Anthony had been able to remove the demon in less than a week, relying on the prayer to St. Michael and a silver cross that had once belonged to Pope Leo XIII. Nothing could have prepared either of us for what we found on Palmer Avenue. We were sent there at the behest of Father Felipe, a parish priest who noticed that Maya Knowles, one of the young women attending his church, had missed several weeks of Sunday Mass. It's unfortunately common for young people to fall out of love with the faith, but it raised a small flag for the Father Felipe, who caught up with her mother, Sharon, one day after Mass to ask her if anything was wrong. Sharon immediately burst into tears, confessing that her previously bright, cheerful daughter had become a recluse overnight, refusing to leave her room. Again, such things happen, but it aroused the Father Felipe's interest, and he paid the family a visit a few days later. What he witnessed upon entering the girl's room was enough to make him call us immediately. Rather than paraphrase, I'll include a transcription of the voicemail he left here. There was a foul smell. It hit you all the way down the hall. Some kind of cocktail of sweat and excrement. It grew more powerful as I approached Maya's room, such that I was hesitant to enter. At the doorway, I hesitated. That's when I heard the awful growling, like an animal's stomach, left empty far too long. Nothing about it sounded the least bit human. I said a prayer and entered. The girl I almost hesitate to call her that now had been beautiful when I last saw her. So much so that she'd been the subject of several confessions from teenage boys in the parish, all unable to take their eyes off of her. Adult men too. Her mother had been pushing her toward a career in modeling, television, something I warned them both about. Pride. The dangers of the superficial. Of course, I'm a priest in LA. I have many such conversations. I will say that Maya's mother was particularly obsessed with her daughter's career in a way that gave me pause, but I felt that if I confronted her too harshly about the subject, I might push her away from the faith entirely. When I walked into the room, I had to suppress my urge to vomit. Maya lay in a bed in the center of the dark bedroom. Something, its texture uneven and smudged with fingerprints, had been rubbed and dried over the windows, blocking out the light. Despite the near dark, I could just make out Maya's skeletal form, her skin clinging like tissue to her bones, exposing every crease. The growling sound was emanating from her stomach and upper throat, the low pitch more like the death row of some great beast than a teenage girl. There was a scratching sound filling the room too, and when I looked closer, I realized that she was weakly moving her arm, grabbing handfuls of dry rice from a 50-pound bag by her side. She moved her hand to her lips, eating the dry rice whole before going back for another handful. Looking around by her bedside, I saw at least 6 or 7 similar bags littered on the floor. Like what you see? She asked me. Of course not. I'm not exactly your type, am I? Couldn't get hard for a girl like me if you tried. Maybe worth a shot though. Why don't you come a little closer? Give me a little kiss? I knew, in that moment, that I was in mortal danger. Behind me, the door began to close on its own accord, and as I reached back to stop it, it slammed shut. I heard the crunch of bone as my fingers smashed in the doorframe. The break was bad enough that I could see the white of my bone through the skin, and I was bleeding profusely. Suddenly, the girl was up, without a sound. She'd moved to the foot of the bed, her legs, no thicker than pool cues dangling over the side. You smell amazing, Father, she said. She stood, and her posture was bent, unnatural. One of her knees seemed to bend the opposite way. One of her arms seemed to have broken in so many places that it flapped like a tentacle. With my good hand, I pulled the door open as hard as I could, trying to free my limp fingers and escape before she could reach me. She stepped deliberately. I sensed that she could move faster if she desired, but she enjoyed watching me squirm. Almost without thinking, I began to recite a Hail Mary, in the original Latin, something that has always brought me peace. As the words exited my mouth, I could tell that Maya was bothered, even taking a small step back. Shut up, she was muttering. Shut up about that bitch. But I refused to stop, and as I did, I was able to pry the door open, a little at a time. Then, all at once, Maya was screaming, commanding me to close my mouth. Suddenly, the door flew open, and I stumbled through, shutting it behind me as fast as I could. After that, there was only silence. No one has heard a thing from inside the room since then. I have instructed Maya's mother to avoid going inside at all costs. We need help, desperately. A strange look had crossed Father Anthony's face after he heard the message. He went to consult a few old books in his personal library as I listened to the message on repeat, trying to sift through the details. How bad is it? I asked when he returned. It is what it is, he said. The protocols are clear. We go. We evaluate. Should it turn out to be a major exorcism, we will use the prayer to St. Michael for as long as it takes. Pack your large suitcase. It may be a while. Father, I asked, has the prayer ever failed to remove the entity? He shook his head. Demons are cowards by nature. With some luck, within a few weeks it will flee, just as its brethren have before. Father Anthony and I were different in our faith. Mine was almost like romance, swelling one day and waning the next, ever present but varying vastly depending on my mood. His was steady. To Father Anthony, the universe was perfectly ordered, bound by immutable laws. To him, the prayers always worked. Just as one pool ball colliding with another would predictably transfer its force, so too would his prayers send demons reeling. You look worried, he said, as I played the message again. Don't. It's unseemly for a man of the cloth. Pack your bag. By now, you should know that time is critical. Though he was almost steady as always, I noticed a slight tick as he spoke, like his mouth couldn't stop twitching. Looking down, I saw he was carrying a small pouch of red velvet that I'd never seen before. Just a precaution, he said. Hopefully something we don't need until much further into your training. I never expected to become an exorcist. My family wasn't even Catholic growing up. My parents were hippie types, mercurial in their beliefs. For a while, we attended a Baptist church. Then, just as I'd finally learned all of the lyrics to the hymns, we moved 2 towns away, where my mom got swept up in the Kabbalah and tried to drag us all into it with her. Before I was a teenager, I'd spent a day or two in a mosque, a Swinomish smokehouse, and a Gnostic temple. It was my wife, Sophia, who brought me into the faith. She had grown up in a big Italian-American family in New York, and for her Catholicism was the same as family. I converted to marry her. All it took was a few months of classes and a ceremony on Easter. I didn't even ask myself if I believed in God. It was enough to believe in Sophia. She was a true believer in the best sense of the word, generous to a fault, always exhausting herself trying to keep us all happy. All year, she sewed quilts, using them as Christmas presents or baby shower gifts. Several times, she tried to teach me how to sew, but I was hopeless, clumsy. She loved me anyway. Then, one Thanksgiving, after staying up far too late drinking wine and prepping vegetables, she woke up and decided to run to the store for pre-made dinner rolls. It was icy. She wasn't even speeding, but it didn't matter. She skidded into oncoming traffic at the wrong time. She died instantly. After she was gone, none of my usual crutches dulled the pain. Alcohol, throwing myself into work, exercise. It all felt hollow, insufficient to replace Sophia. We held a funeral mass shortly after she died, and it was the first time I felt an ounce of peace. The light streaming in from the stained glass windows suddenly seemed different to me, as if heaven were actually on the other side if I could just step through them. I found myself going to church more often after that, not just on Sundays, but on weekdays too, right after work. I'd watch the darkening sky through the stained glass as I knelt in one of the back pews, and for a short time, I felt like Sophia wasn't so far away. Eventually, the priest there, Father Ignatius, would gently tell me that it was well past closing time, and I would leave. Until one day, he asked me to come with him. I wonder if you'd consider joining the priesthood, he said. Some widowers do. I laughed. I'm barely Catholic, I said. I just joined for her. He shook his head. I don't believe you. The house at 1237 Palmer Avenue was decadent, even by LA standards. Set back on a nearly full-acre lot bordered by a tall stucco wall, the house soured up 3 stories, all elegant metal and glass. Later, we would learn that the girl's father had paid well over $1 million for the architect alone before construction ever started. As we approached, we noted that one bedroom where the light shone brown red though a darkened window. Reflexively, we both made the sign of the cross. Sitting on the front steps, we met Father Felipe, who was half asleep, slumped against the rail. Though he couldn't have been much older than 30, his skin appeared sallow, his eyes ringed like a cold, distant planet. His hand was wrapped in a thick bandage crusted with blood. Father Anthony, Father Matthew, he reached out, his hands shaking, before breaking down in sobs. I could tell Father Anthony was unsettled at this greeting. You have done your part now, Father Felipe, he said. You should go back to your church. Pray, rest. Father Felipe shook his head. I won't leave until we've seen this through, he said. I made a promise to myself. Father Anthony shook his head. That's merely pride whispering in your ear, he said. Please. Go. Father Felipe reached down into his pocket and found a piece of candy. He popped it into his mouth. His breath was rank, and I wondered how long it had been since he last brushed his teeth. I'll just wait a little longer, he said, just until you've had a chance to go in. I could tell Father Anthony wasn't happy about this, but he was eager to go in and get to work. We brushed past Father Felipe, who fell back into a ball on the steps, and we walked to the door. Father Anthony rang the doorbell once, then waited patiently. After perhaps 15 seconds, he scowled and rang it again. Mrs. Knowles, he called, but there was no response. Then, finally, he turned the knob and we entered. Immediately, the stench hit us both. The house smelled as if the walls around us would burst, sending a flood of excrement down to cover our feet. Father Anthony raised a handkerchief to his nose, passing another to me so that I could do the same. Again, he called for Mrs. Knowles, but there was no response. Somewhere, up above we heard a skittering sound, knocks on the wood, like someone on stilts running through the hall. Father Anthony fumbled in his pocket, removing his silver cross. He began to wave it ever so slightly back and forth, like a hypnotist's pendulum, as he recited a Hail Mary. Mrs. Knowles? I shouted, and the thumping sound stopped. She's in the kitchen, said a voice that made my heart nearly stop. It was deep and resonant and seemed to speak from all around us. Father Anthony gestured for me to go to the kitchen. You find the mother. I'll go up to talk to the girl, he said. He had removed the red velvet bag from his pocket and was loosening its drawstring. Maybe we should call for assistance, I said, but he shook his head. If we follow the rites, we will prevail. Remember, God is on our side. Go find the mother and get her out of the house. Hurry. Without another word, he headed up the stairs. I walked down the hall toward the kitchen, almost running. Then, as I reached the archway separating the rooms, I stopped and vomited, barely able to comprehend what I was seeing. There in the kitchen, lay Mrs. Knowles. Or rather, what was left of her. In the center of the room lay a pile of bloody broken bones, all stacked in a messy pile and topped with a broken skull matted in blonde hair. Most of her, the flesh, the organs, the brain and muscle. The thought was all gone. Time may have passed. I can't be sure. My vision seemed to go black and then red. Strangely, I found myself oddly hungry. So much so that I nearly opened the refrigerator to look for something to eat. Then I heard a scream from upstairs, and my senses came back to me. I ran through the hall and up the staircase, 2 steps at a time. It was clearly Father Anthony screaming, his cries mixed with the prayer to Saint Michael. Thy thousand hosts are spread, embattled o'er the azure sky. But Michael bears thy standard dread, and lifts the might cross on high. The prayer was punctuated with repeated shrieks, both from him and someone else. I ran down the hallway toward Maya's room, the rank smell growing so thick it seemed to thicken the very air. In the room, I found them. They were coiled together, like 2 pythons both trying to strangle the other. Blood was everywhere, flowing freely from wounds on both of their bodies. Somehow, in the few minutes since we'd parted ways, Anthony had managed to lose both legs and his left arm, all bitten down to the nubs. Another long gash had opened his belly, and his guts were hanging out of him. With his one good arm he was holding something gleaming up to Maya's face. Through the hazy air and the blood, it took me a few seconds to recognize it as a needle and silver thread. Somehow, he had managed to apply 3 or 4 stitches across the girl's mouth, sealing it almost shut. Now, even as he tried to apply a 4th stitch, she bit at his fingers with the side of her mouth, severing the pinky and chewing it with obvious joy. Father Michael cried out, but continued the prayer. He, in that sign, the rebel powers, did, with their dragon prince, expel, and hurled them from the heaven's high towers, down, like a thunderbolt, to hell. Every part of me wanted to run. If I'm being honest, I wanted to tear my collar and robes from my body and sprint into the LA night, never looking back. But something in me refused. Instead, I sprang forward, taking the shaking needle from Father Anthony's shaking fingers. I did everything right, he said weakly, and then the light in his eyes went out. Maya turned her attention to me now, trying to bite me, shouting curses. Run, run, little assistant, you're in over your head. I stared at the silver thread dangling from her mouth. I'd never even heard of such a thing. There were rules, protocols that I'd never even heard of, that I wasn't ready for. The girl smiled, pulling at the thread, beginning to unravel Father Anthony's careful work. I saw now that she would open her mouth wide and eat me down to the very bone, that I would scream while she chewed up my lungs and heart. Indeed, she was reaching for Anthony's guts now, slurping his intestines through the small hole still left on the side of her mouth. Except that I wasn't seeing any of that now. I was in a quiet room with Sophia, sitting side by side. On ours laps was a quilt. She was smiling, the light catching the strands of her light brown hair. I can't do it, I was saying, fumbling with the needle. Of course you can, she said. It's not science. It's just in and out, in and out. We know you're good at that. I blushed, the needle slipping out from between my fingers. Just relax, she said. Here, let me guide you. She put her hand on mine, her flesh warm and soft. Slowly, she guided my fingers down through the soft white fabric. Then suddenly, I was back. I watched my fingers slip the silver thread through Maya's lips. Only a crack at the side of her mouth remained exposed. You were different than them, she said, her words more muffled now, and it almost sounded like a normal girl's voice. You carry someone with you. Who? I used the moment of surprise to apply the final stitch, blood pooling around the thread as I cinched it shut, silencing her forever. As soon as it was done, she fell back in the bed, her eyes closing as sleep took her. After a while, after I'd gotten my thoughts together, I called Father Anthony's superior at the Vatican to explain what had happened. I tried to stay calm, to explain things as accurately as possible, but I'm sure my voice was shaking. Around me, the worst of the stench was gone, though ordinary one's blood, bile persisted. Still, the air was that much cleaner than before, and I found I was able to breathe. I expected him to doubt my story, but he just listened without saying anything. Then, finally, as I reached the end of what I had to say, he spoke. You were able to apply the stitches yourself? Just the last couple. Father Anthony did most of the work. He paused for a moment. Did you have any other, outside help? I thought about that for a second. About Sophia. Maybe. You did well, he said. We will send people, for both you and the girl. They will bring you back here. To the Vatican? Is that the protocol? There was a brief pause. Father Anthony was a firm believer in protocol. Are you? No, I said after a moment. Good, he said. Then we will have much to discuss when you arrive.